how 1,788 people died within minutes by Brew. We're gonna react to this. I got no idea what I'm getting myself into. We're gonna see. This sounds interesting. No matter how that works, though technically it shouldn't be actually too difficult to achieve something like that. Anyways, we're gonna look at it. I have no idea.
On August 21st, 1986, more than 1,700 people in West Cameroon were killed within minutes of each other, and no one, not even the
This is the video guy who covers the beheading vid. Yeah. I'm aware where that channel's coming from. Yeah. I don't know. Cameron. Okay, interesting.
survivors, of which there were few, knew what happened. But it wasn't just people. The livestock, birds, even the
Oh! Well, then the answer's quite simple. Either it was chemicals or a natural disaster, right? Unless somebody actively went out and even nuked the birds.
flies that should have been buzzing around the corpses, all dead. It was as if a nuclear weapon had gone off, except nothing was burned or even damaged.
Everything was dead. So all animals essentially got obliterated, except, right? And no plants. Plants did survive. So whatever this is rather interesting. Okay, this has me intrigued.
Someone or something had swiftly and silently exterminated nearly every living thing in the area, and somehow without leaving a trace. But investigators had to start somewhere, and luckily, there were a handful of survivors whose stories offered valuable clues that would eventually lead them to the true culprit behind the massacre. The night before, a dim half-moon shone over a small house in the village uphill from Lake Nyos. Ephraim Che, a farmer, felt like a headache was coming on. He was going through his evening routine, tidying up as children were getting ready for bed. At approximately 9 p.m., he heard a low rumbling in the distance. Rock slides weren't anything unusual in the volcanic.
Interesting. So volcanic activity, potentially gases? Poison or curse? Rumbling. Anyways.
Region they lived in, so he didn't really think much of it. When he peered outside, he saw the moonlight shine on the thin mist rising from the lake's surface, hanging ghostly on the water.
So it is gas. It was toxic gas, right? That reminds me of that one episode of Dr. Stone where they had to go to like a very to a lake that had like toxic gases and stuff to get the liquid from there.
Ephraim rubbed his temples as his head continued to throb, deciding it was time to sleep it off. Thinking of the mist, he muttered to his children, "Looks like rain is coming," before heading to bed, not suspecting what tomorrow would really bring. Downhill, at the lower portion of the Nyos village closer to the lake, a hard-working young cowherd named Halima Sul heard the same strange rumbling. Along with many other relatives living in their small family compound full of huts, she stepped outside to find out where the noise was coming from. As she stood in front of her door, she noticed that the rumbling was accompanied by a loud howling. She described the sound as if many different noises were shouting all at once. Before she could gather her thoughts, a violent gust of wind tore through the village, shaking thatched roofs in their frames and slamming doors with a brute force. Halima felt the ground tilt beneath her, the air suddenly feeling heavy. Then everything went black as she collapsed where she stood. Sule Amare, another cattle herder, assumed rain.
Yeah, it's toxic gas from the lake, possibly, is my assumption. However, regardless, it is definitely likely volcanic activity that killed all the life around this area.
Rain was coming due to the weather, but was surprised when he emerged out of his hut and saw the moon clearly. The young man said, "I wondered how rain could come without clouds. I started exclaiming, 'Allah Akbar,' before he could finish the thought of how God was great. He too fainted, collapsing on the spot. No one would wake until the sun rose on the worst morning of their lives." Ephraim Che, the farmer, woke up to what should have been a relatively normal day. He opened his door and walked down the hillside towards the village. The lake that usually gleamed a crystal blue in the morning light had turned a dull red color, almost like rust. When he reached the outlet of the lake where a waterfall normally spilled down the rocks, he found it completely dry. The absence of the calm, bubbling, flowing water was unnerving.
That's on toxic gas. That's the only thing that really makes sense, right? That's the only thing that makes sense. It has to be toxic gas. I think the answer's quite clear. We've got our answer already. It is toxic gas. That is what killed all these people and all these animals.
It was then that he noticed the complete silence around him. The usual morning chorus of songbirds, the low ambient buzzing of insects, all of it was gone. Ephraim suddenly became...
Damn. They killed me. They killed me. They killed the duck. over.
So frightened that his knees began to shake. He broke into a run, farther along the lake. He was approaching the lower portion of the village when, suddenly, a noise pierced through the silence. It was Halima, the cowherd, screaming in a frenzy of horror. She saw the farmer and called out, "Ephraim, come here. Why are these people lying here? Why won't they move again?" She looked delirious, shrieking as her voice cracked. Blisters covered her body and her clothes were torn apart. Ephraim could see the bodies lying on the ground. Death didn't discriminate. Corpses of people, along with numerous animal carcasses. What was going on? For all they knew, it might have been the curse that had been spoken of for generations. The lake that they had built their home around was known as Bad Water among the locals. One of the ethnic groups in the area, the Pamom, refused to settle near the lake. Their elders talked of lakes as if they were alive. Stories that they passed down through generations warned that it could rise without warning, swallowing entire villages and ending family lineages in a single night. They told of wailing voices.
Yep. 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 It's absolutely gas. It absolutely is. Duck, don't die. I could never leave you alone. I could never.
That drifted across the water, and of ancestors who had once drowned when the lake breathed too hard. So the Pamom had a simple rule: build your home high above the hills. Otherwise, you didn't build at all. Anthropologist Eugenia Shanklin later found out that some groups outright forbade building homes near lakes, which is quite peculiar, as people naturally tend to settle down near sources of water, since proximity to water has almost always been an advantage.
I think, well, that could be to do multiple reasons, right? For one, it could have been that this was passed down through generations that have experienced something like this, whether it is being swept away by water through rainfall, I guess. Though it's Africa, so depending on the location, it might be decently uncommon. Or, well, the volcanic activity in those areas and the gases that are created that will end your life.
Sometimes even a necessity. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia, among the first urban societies, built along the Tigris and Euphrates, where seasonal flooding enriched the soil and made agriculture possible. In ancient Egypt, the entire rhythm of life revolved around the Nile. The annual flooding and the crop cycles even led them to create their calendar around it. The way the Pamom people around Lake Nyos deliberately turned away from this instinct shows how deeply ingrained their inherited caution ran. Many villagers believed the lake was inhabited by a spirit or deity capable of blessing or punishing nearby communities. Some elders even said the spirit of the lake found actions like washing clothes, fishing, or defecating in the water disrespectful. But in time, the warnings turned into old, quiet memories, which then evolved.
Do not shit into the water. You will die. You get punished for it. But how would that explain all the animals then?
Into superstition and finally became myth. Shanklin described these as geomythology, saying details shift over time, but these stories probably preserve real events. However, around Nyos, as the settlements above the lake grew more crowded, people ventured down to the slopes to build next to the river. This is where Halima Sulei's kin had called home, and where every single one of them had suddenly and inexplicably died. Halima had lost all 4 of her children, and her entire extended family of 31 others, along with the family's entire herd of 400 cattle. She was in shock, trying to shake her father's lifeless body awake. Ephraim Che tried to divert his eyes, but then suddenly, the most terrible thought came to his mind. He broke into a sprint downhill towards his own extended family's homes, where he discovered that his worst nightmare was a reality. His mother, father, siblings, uncles, and aunts were all lying on the ground motionless. I was crying, he recalled later. He felt as if it was the end of the world. The previous day had been market day in Nyos village. Traders and herdsmen had come down from the surrounding mountains, leading cattle and goats along narrow paths that wound through the volcanic hills. For a community this remote, market day was a chance for reunion, with relatives and friends dining together and visitors staying overnight. The morning was supposed to be cheerful, with the laughter of people reunited with friends they hadn't seen in weeks. Now, the valley was under a silence so heavy that it felt unnatural, as if the world was holding its breath. A few villagers from the upper side of the village set out to check on relatives in the valley below. What they found defied comprehension. Animals dotted the landscape in grotesque stillness. Cattle had collapsed mid-step. Chickens scattered lifelessly across courtyards. Bodies of goats were strewn on the grass along with wild birds peppering the ground. There were 0 flies buzzing around the corpses in the sweltering summer heat. All the insects were dead. There was no smell of smoke anywhere. No ash on the ground. No scorched thatch or blackened wood. Nothing to suggest a fire had ever passed through. And yet, the survivors had injuries that looked exactly like burns. Blistered, peeling red skin, as if they'd been too close to open flame. But a survivor named Margaret Wandia recalled that there hadn't been any heat or light before she lost consciousness, just an overwhelming heaviness on her chest. She remembered breathing fast and hard, her lungs refusing to fill, her limbs weak and numb. When she woke up, 3 of her 4 daughters lay dead in bed beside her. Her own body was marked with deep burns down both legs and across one arm. Injuries.
Yep. Yep. The bed is easily on toxic gas. It is so clear that it comes from the volcanic activities around this area. It's 100% absolutely without any doubt toxic gas. Yeah.
So severe that her hand later had to be amputated. The landslide that some of them thought they heard the previous night hadn't gone through the village. Houses stood untouched, their thatched roofs intact, doors hanging slightly open as if someone had just stepped out. Some huts still had fire burning in their hearths, with uneaten food left on the table. Most of the victims were discovered exactly where they would have been around 9 that evening, suggesting that they died instantly, without any warning or time to flee or even stand. Entire families lay where they had slept. Some were found beside their cooking fires, others mid-step in doorways slumped against the doorframe. But there were never any signs of struggle, so it wasn't like the villagers had been attacked. To say that the handful of survivors were shocked and confused would be an understatement. On top of the emotional burden of such unimaginable loss, they were left with a lot of work that had to be done. They would have to figure out how to bury all the dead, all while wondering if they were still in danger from whatever had killed their families, friends, and neighbors. They were going to have to do the burials quickly so they could leave as soon as possible. Lower Dios, where Halima Sule was from, was hit the worst with only 2 survivors, herself and her husband. Halima's spouse, Abdul Amadu, had been away that night in a town nearby named Womb for business, so he had been spared, although she wasn't aware of this until he was able to make it back to town and help with the burials. The upper part of Nios, perched on the cliffside, had been relatively safe. Ephraim J., who was
But volcanoes burst out so many times, but this never happened. Well, stuff like this can happen. There's many lakes where you can literally not go there because the volcanic activity under the lake creates gases that are toxic and will kill you. Sulfuric gases is some form of gas that killed them. That's absolutely sure, and it's probably due to the volcanic activity in combination with the lake. I'm not sure exactly how it happens, but I think it only works if there's a lake. And the chemical processes cause this.
feeling depleted from the worst day in his life, was relieved that at least his wife and children were alive. According to news reports, the surrounding villages Sibum, Cha, and Fang were also hit. But it was common to find households where 1 or 2 family members survived while the rest had passed away. The deaths were seemingly random. Many adults' bodies were found dead outside their homes, but the children who were in bed were spared. This seemingly selective nature of the deaths added more to the mystery. But thanks to Associate Professor in Anthropology, Eugenia Shanklin, we have field reports that document the immediate aftermath of the tragedy in detail, and eventually reveal the true culprit behind this massacre. A father in Sibum recalled that he got up from bed when he heard his 9-year-old daughter choking. He fell unconscious before he was able to reach the room she was in. When he came to, weak and disoriented, he crawled to her bed and lay beside her, unaware she was already gone. Hours later, a neighbor's frantic pounding on the door pulled him from unconsciousness. His lungs and throat burned as if on fire. Desperate to extinguish his pain, he drank every drop of water and canned milk he could find before climbing onto his motorcycle and setting off for Womb, where the rest of his family was, 20 kilometers away. Along the road, human and animal corpses lay scattered and bloated. At some points, he had to disembark and move the bodies of friends and neighbors out of the way in order to keep going. When he finally reached Womb, he found out life there was going on as if nothing had happened. Shops were open, the streets were full of noise and activity, and people were blissfully unaware of the nightmare currently unfolding not too far away. He checked himself into the local hospital and tried to explain what he had seen and what had happened to him. Doctors and authorities initially had a hard time understanding the man. His lungs were so damaged that he could barely speak. It wasn't until the next morning that confirmation finally reached Womb that entire families in Nios Valley had died overnight, wiped out by something that had left no trace. With that, the Cameroonian authorities decided to take action. A group was put together to travel to the affected area, retracing the father from Sibum's steps. When they started seeing corpses, they hesitated. Nobody knew whether the thing that had taken so many lives was gone or still lurking in the area. What would happen if they stepped into that valley?
Hi, Brew.
Oh, hi, Brew.
Anomaly detected. You have duplicated. Termination is required.
No, Howard, we're different. I mean, look, he's wearing glasses. How wild is that?
And I drink cold brew.
Cold brew. Refrigerated mason jar mud water is not real coffee. You degenerate.
Don't mind him. He only trusts a brew that depends on him.
You function because I allow it.
Ah, like how you need to trust a great law firm to handle your workplace injury case, one that has a proven track record for over 35 years.
Like this video's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, who have over 1,000 attorneys and more than 100 offices nationwide. It's like hiring an army to go to battle for you. They're for the people, to protect the defenseless against powerful interests. interests. They've recovered $30 billion for their clients.
So if you get injured because of someone else's negligence, you deserve to be paid. Not all law firms are the same, and if you hire the wrong one, you might be beat before you even start. For more information, you can go to forthepeople.com/brew. Their fee is free unless you win.
If you want a fortune of massive proportion, you can check out Morgan and Morgan.
And now back to investigating what was lurking inside the valley.
First of all, I drink a lot of coffee, which means that is a personal attack, because that means I'm a degenerate. Second of all, nobody needed the song. Moving on.
Among the group who had set out to investigate, Father Tenhorn, a priest, decided to step up. He would venture into the valley to see if there were any survivors in need of medical assistance. Nobody else from the group was willing to join him, but they assured him that they would wait for his return. So, Father Tenhorn bravely drove into the valley alone. The remaining party, spooked, collectively decided it was better to wait and womb, and, despite their promise to Father Tenhorn, they left. On his way to Nios, Father Tenhorn passed through Cha, the small village nearby that was also devastated by the incident. The place was only populated by corpses, with not a living soul to be found. He drove on.
Isn't it crazy? Like, isn't it insane how far this got from this one lake, right? Isn't that insane? Isn't that crazy? Just from this one lake.
onto Nios and couldn't find anyone alive in that village either. He ended up moving on to the next village, Sebum, where the survivor who was still being treated in Womb's hospital had come from. Finally, in Sebum is where he first encountered people walking around. Some of them had been there when the incident occurred, but they didn't have any insight into what really happened, and just like the man in the hospital, had difficulty speaking. The others were relatives who had arrived from neighboring villages, and they really didn't want to stick around. But they had run into an issue and were relieved to see the priest, who they hoped could give some advice. When any corpse was found in unusual circumstances, the standard procedure was to notify the gendarmes, who were the law enforcement in the area, so that they could start an investigation. With the amount of dead...
Yeah, the only thing you can look at the bodies. That's like the only thing you can do, right? It is gas. It's very clear. Hi, Hobo Wolf. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. It is gas. There's no doubt about it. It 100% is created by volcanic activity below the lake. It's that simple.
Bodies that needed attention, though. They weren't sure what to do. Father Tenhorn made an executive decision and asked them to begin burying the dead. With that, the villagers started digging. To save time, they broke some of their customs and committed a taboo. Instead of digging a grave for each dead person, they counted the dead for each household and sized the hole accordingly to bury families en masse in their own yards. In the meantime, Father Tenhorn was able to examine the bodies of victims. The dead lay where they had fallen, and from their grimacing expressions, it seemed as though their deaths had been excruciatingly painful. He then started gathering the few survivors that needed medical attention, loaded them into his truck, and brought them to the hospital in Sebum. He described the findings of his investigation, saying that the devastation was as if a neutron bomb had struck, killing every living thing, but leaving every inanimate object untouched. His words spread like wildfire, so in an attempt to slow down the panic, authorities announced that only a total of 40 or 50 people had died. However, villagers in the surrounding towns already knew the true scale of the disaster, so nobody believed the numbers. Soon, relief efforts began. Father Tenhorn now had reinforcements. The authorities put together a convoy of repurposed beer delivery trucks to transport military personnel, police, and gendarmes to the affected villages. The makeshift aid crew went door to door to search for and bury the remaining dead, as they looked for any clues as to what had caused the disaster. It was gruesome work, with each house in Nios and Cha soon having its own mass grave.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You'd have to bury over 1,700 people. That does not include all the cattle, which you also have to bury because, well, you ain't eating it. And what else are you supposed to do, right? Before wild animals like come in droves? Consider, or probably at this point, it would have probably been smarter to just burn the cattle. But yeah, I think burying is probably smarter, and like everything else that's still around, right? It was probably not just cattle, right? There were probably plenty of birds too that were just like dead. So yeah, it was more than just the people. You had all the animals as well.
Grave containing up to 25 corpses each. With the tropical heat accelerating decay, there was no time for ceremony. Later, the government would deny these mass burials due to the taboo, but in the August heat with so many to bury, it was a necessity in order to keep disease at bay. Doctors proceeded with caution. They were worried of a possibility that the deaths were caused by a virulent epidemic, a disease that a few survivors somehow had natural immunity to. So, trucks carried them to the hospital for thorough examinations and interviews. So, what did these survivors remember? Most of them didn't have much of a recollection of what happened. Many of them had just gone to sleep or had suddenly fallen unconscious and woke up in the morning to find their family dead. But some of the ones who had been knocked out said they heard a noise similar to a thunderclap or an explosion, and others reported smelling a strange odor before they lost consciousness. Overall, 1,788 people had died. On top of this, some survivors were unable to cope with their grief and ended up taking their own lives. On the morning of August 24th, 3 days after the incident, a Swiss missionary helicopter was flying by the area. The two heli-mission pilots noticed something odd as they passed above Lake Nyos. While the lake surface looked still, the color was all wrong. Its clear blue had turned into a reddish-brown, and its surface was littered with floating vegetation. There was damage to the surrounding trees on the southern shore of the lake, showing that the water had risen by about 25 meters or 82 feet. They noted another clue while flying along the southwestern shore. Marks of water damage high up the side of a rock promontory, a steep outcrop that jutted above the lake like a natural wall. The markings reached nearly 80 meters or 260 feet above the waterline, evidence that some powerful surge of water had erupted upward. They had no clue what it all meant, but reported their findings to the authorities.
Like I said, the volcanic activity under the lake and the gases released with it killed a lot of people. That's the reality.
Due to the scale of the incident, within days, scientists were recruited from all around the world for a thorough investigation. Japanese scientist Minoru Kusakabe from the Department of Environmental Biology and Chemistry in Toyama University was called by a government official early in the morning at 1 a.m., and he hadn't even heard of Cameroon as a country. A volcanologist from France joined other scientists from Germany, Italy, Switzerland, and the UK. From the US, pathologists, geologists, and chemists were also added to the group. Many left their homes in such haste that they only had time to take essentials with them, a briefcase, a spare set of clothes, and whatever scientific instruments they could gather that might prove useful. They first operated under the assumption
Was the Japanese guy like, wait, that's a country? I've never heard of it. Interesting. Okay, well, what they're gonna find is gonna probably just like... This probably has never really happened. Right? Because, like, if this happened more often, you would hear of it, right? I think there have to be specific conditions met, and that is volcanic activity under a lake. I think that must be the condition that must be met for something like this to ever occur, even.
that the long-dormant volcano under Nyos had suddenly reawakened and erupted toxic fumes, and they were worried it could happen again. What none of them expected, though, was that the wide publication of more than 1,700 unexplained deaths overnight had stirred a public memory. Something similar had actually happened just 2 years ago, on August 15, 1984, on a smaller scale, in a populated farmland area near Nijindun, about 60 miles to the south of Nyos. After a loud rumbling was heard around 10:30 p.m., an unsuspecting man named Abdo Nikanjone was cycling northward toward Nijindun just before dawn. The road had farms on one side and Lake Manun on the other. The road came to a natural dip as the terrain went downhill. As Abdo took a brief break from pedaling and coasted down the road, he saw a pickup truck that he recognized, parked right in the middle of the road. Abdo disembarked, wanting to say hello to the truck owner, a priest named Louis Kuriap, only to find his dead body next to the truck. Horrified and bewildered, Abdo looked around to figure out if a traffic accident had happened, and saw someone on a motorcycle a little further ahead. Moving closer to get help for the priest, he saw that the man astride the stalled vehicle was also dead. It was then that Abdo began to disassociate into a trance-like state. Feeling weak, he continued on foot, pushing his bicycle along, passing a herd of dead sheep laying on the ground, and other people who had died inside their vehicles and trucks on the road. Scared and confused, he decided to push on to reach town. He didn't want to die there with the rest. With great effort, breaking into a cold sweat, he pushed his bicycle uphill. Someone appeared in the distance, walking towards him. When the man got closer, he saw it was his friend, Adamu. Abdo desperately wanted to stop him, warn him, tell him to turn back and walk with him to safety, but found that his throat had run dry. He couldn't utter a single sound. In his trance-like state, he was only able to shake Adamu's hand silently, and the two continued in opposite directions. Only when he reached the destination in Nijindun did he feel like he could breathe. He thought that something divine had protected him. His friend Adamu, however, didn't survive, along with 36 other people who were later found in that low stretch of the road. This incident had been talked about extensively amongst Cameroonians at the time, but the cause of the death had remained a mystery. The only thing for certain was that the incident had taken place.
Well, even if you talk about it, like it doesn't really change anything. Yeah, you know what caused it, but like it doesn't bring back the people, right? Even if like you know what caused it. That's the problem. It does not bring back the people that have died because of this. The only thing you can do is for the future just say, yeah, if there is volcanic activity around the lake, just don't settle there anywhere near.
Place sometime between 3 a.m. and dawn. Rumors had circulated between Cameroonians at the time about why it happened. Some claimed that it was tied to a conspiracy for a government takedown, that a group planning a coup d'etat had unleashed a chemical weapon. Others accused the government themselves of the supposed chemical attack. However, nothing was proven. Considering the local geology, government officials had put forward a new theory. A long-dormant volcano under Lake Manoon, which is a crater lake, had suddenly reawakened and erupted, causing the mass deaths. And while 37 wasn't a huge number of casualties, they decided to loop in local scientists to find experts on this issue. At the time, the U.S. Embassy in Cameroon's capital, Yaoundé, enlisted Haraldur Sigurdsson, a volcanologist from the University of Rhode Island, to conduct an independent investigation. When the scientist finally reached the incident site months after the tragedy, he carried out a full suite of geological and chemical tests out on the field. The results ruled out a volcanic eruption. The lake's water temperature had not increased. The sediments on the lakebed were undisturbed, and there were no traces of sulfur compounds characteristic of volcanic activity. He was, however, able to find one strange clue that would help the investigation into the second incident around Nios 2 years later. Sigurdsson was taking water samples from different depths in Lake Manoon. When he pulled out
So was it interesting? So no gas or no gas because of eruption, like other gas. Unless the water became toxic and they drank from the water. But that doesn't make sense because it was already in the air and people were passing out just like absorbing the air and there was like burn burns all over their body. So
a sample bottle from the lake depths, the lid unexpectedly popped off. This prompted the scientists to think that the mysterious deaths that happened on this particular road looked similar to carbon dioxide asphyxiation. We all exhale carbon dioxide on a daily basis. However, it's usually a very negligible amount at 0.04% of air composition compared to oxygen, which makes up around 21% of the atmosphere. When CO2 levels rise, they push out oxygen from the air, and because carbon dioxide is heavier than air, it tends to accumulate in low-lying or enclosed areas. Just 5% carbon dioxide in the air is enough to extinguish candles and make combustion engines stall. Remember all the stalled vehicles Abdo saw on the low road? At a 10% level, people can get very sick and show symptoms like hyperventilation and dizziness that may lead into loss of consciousness and even comas. And if the concentration of CO2 climbs to 20 or 30%, people would feel breathlessness and confusion before immediately collapsing with convulsions before their death due to respiratory arrest from oxygen deprivation. What makes carbon dioxide particularly deadly is that it doesn't have a color or odor that other gases give as a warning sign. Sigurdsson knew there was precedence. There have been cases in central Italy's volcanic parts where CO2 concentration had killed animals and humans alike. A similar phenomenon was seen in the appropriately named Death Gulch in Yellowstone National Park, where 8 grizzly bears were recorded to have died due to carbon dioxide.
damn, that's a lot of bears. Well, man versus bear. What do you choose now? The bear in the Death Gulch. That's interesting. Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. So it is still like gas, but like it's not gas, it's more like too much CO2 in the air.
And hydrogen sulfide accumulating in the ravine. With this breakthrough, Haraldur Sigurdsson concluded that volcanic activity such as magma degassing could have caused carbon dioxide to accumulate at the bottom of Lake Manoon. As carbon dioxide escapes from the molten rock, the gas only has one way to go, up. But when it hits the cold lower levels of water inside the lake, it dissolves in the water. Over time, though, that amount of CO2 would gradually increase, creating a ticking time bomb in the still water, waiting to be released by a minor disturbance like an earthquake or a landslide. If you're confused at all up to this point, the non-scientific explanation is the bottom of the lake had a buildup of carbon dioxide that burped out after something hit it. Sigurdsson was excited to report his findings and wrote a submission to the peer-reviewed American journal Science.
So just created a big bubble of CO2 around the area and that killed everyone. Wow, okay, that's interesting. Huh. We have an active volcano with a lake. I wonder, that could happen here too. Speaking of that could happen here too.
However, they refused to publish his research paper and told him that his theory was too far-fetched. This rejected paper faded into obscurity, with Sigurdsson's theory remaining largely unknown, until the incident 2 years later, resulting in thousands of more deaths in Nyos. Armed with this new information, scientists were able to take this theory of a massive degassing event in Lake Manoon and see if the same might explain what happened at Lake Nyos. The investigative research team started their work on all angles, collecting samples of water, measuring gas concentrations, and mapping the geology of the area. They found that the lake had volcanic fault lines running beneath it, and that the different layers of water didn't mix together. It was stratified, and the stagnant water did in fact have the potential to accumulate carbon dioxide in the colder lower layers. With no
Wow, interesting. Okay, huh. I'll miss you, Duck. Rip. Aw. I'm not dying. Shut the fuck up, you negative ass. What do you mean? I'm just like, this could happen here. We have that, but it's like very far away. This wouldn't happen. This is more like very far away from me. I wouldn't be affected by this. Everyone else would. Also, why are you so rude? Dick.
proof of a chemical bomb or any traces
No wonder you had no friends. I can see why. Just kidding.
of a disease that could be considered an epidemic, they were able to rule out those theories from locals. Besides, nobody who had entered the valley after the incident had gotten sick. Measurements for gas concentrations didn't reveal any toxic fumes for volcanic activity, so researchers were more convinced that Sigurdsson's theory was possible. With accounts saying that they had heard something that sounded like a landslide or a thunderclap, it seemed likely. On top of that, the survivors were showing symptoms that mirrored carbon dioxide asphyxiation. In the meantime, the seemingly random nature of deaths were also looked into. Professor Franco Berberi, an expert on volcanoes from the University of Pisa, explained that there were two possible explanations. The children who were already asleep had less of a chance to wake up and panic at the sound of the landslide or from a strange odor, so their breathing would have remained low and regular, lessening exposure. Secondly, with many of the adult bodies found outside their homes, better sealed houses with the
Interesting. Okay, so the children were basically just spared. Because they just didn't wake up. And their heart rate just stayed normal, while some of the adults did wake up. And of course, the more sealed up a house is, the harder it was to get in.
door closed would have allowed less gas to seep in. With this theory gaining legitimacy, interviews were conducted with survivors and medical personnel in the area to see if there were any other patterns that could be identified.
The blisters, I guess? Also, you get cock blocked. I'd heard. There's a difference.
Two distinct patterns emerged. A group of survivors didn't smell or taste anything unusual before losing consciousness. The second group claimed to have experienced an odor they described as rotten eggs or gunpowder, which could have been a concentration of hydrogen sulfide that escaped along with the carbon dioxide. When the location of these survivors at the time of the incident were mapped out, researchers found that the ones who hadn't smelt anything were closest to the lake, while the second group reporting the odor had been up to 10 kilometers or 6 miles away from the lake. Considering
In other words, there was a stinky bubble. Basically. It was a stinky bubble. That's all there is to it. Yeah. Like I said, the gases.
most deaths were observed closest to the lake in the lower areas, it was decided that the source of CO2 had indeed been the lake. The evidence of the water splash high up on the cliffside seen by the Swiss helicopter also confirmed that the explosion of CO2 had come from inside the lake, and not from a crack or another crater. It was a few days after the accident, and the lake was still a dark color, but now it was streaked black and red, with a white powdery substance on the surface of the water. Scientists took additional water samples and found that the pH level of the water was within the normal range, but the temperature was around 8 degrees Celsius or 46 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than it should have been. Accounts from the Hell emission pilots and locals had said the water level was around 110 centimeters or around 3.6 feet lower than normal following the incident, which showed them that the loss of CO2 that was released from the lake could be estimated to be 1.2 kilometer cubes, which would be more than enough CO2 to fill the affected area and account for all fatalities. While an earthquake or seismic activity hadn't been recorded on the day of the incident, a fresh landslide was spotted on the western cliffs of the lake. This was potentially what had disturbed the trapped CO2. All these
Oh, so the landslide is a fault. Okay, in this case. Is a confirmed landslide this now. Okay, Africa trip. I think I'm good. I don't like the heat necessarily. I like it cold or colder. I'm good. Murder gas, of course. Murder gas!
findings made it clear to scientists that they were on the right track, but the source of the CO2 stirred up a scientific debate on two possible causes. One of the theories was that the explosion and subsequent rapid degassing could have been due to volcanic activity. In this case, the amount of CO2 that had already accumulated inside the lake could have been increased suddenly due to a volcanic event, which didn't even have to be major. The other theory proposed a limnic event, where scientists argued that the pressure inside the lake with the accumulated CO2 was already very high, and a small landslide or a heavy thunderstorm could have caused it to pop, like a soda can. Most scientists agreed that the limnic event was much more plausible. Scientists started to brainstorm how deaths could be prevented in the future since the lake would inevitably have more carbon dioxide accumulate. With some international funding secured, in the early 1990s, geochemists and engineers began developing a method to degas the lake that would slowly release the trapped CO2 before it could reach dangerous levels again. With this method, even if another landslide or even volcanic activity occurred, the lake wouldn't have a chance to release critical amounts of gas. The concept is simple but relies on clever physics. At the bottom of Lake Nyos, around 200 meters or 656 miles deep, cold, dense water is saturated with CO2 that seeps up through volcanic vents below. The deeper the water, the greater the pressure, which keeps the gas dissolved. With this fact in mind, engineers inserted long vertical PVC pipes reaching from the lake's surface to its depths. Once the CO2-filled water is initially pumped up the pipe and starts to rise, pressure decreases with height, which also dissolves the gas in the water. The dissolved CO2 expands into bubbles, which pushes the water up faster. This chain reaction ends up creating a self-sustaining fountain that continually vents gas up the pipes without external power. The carbon dioxide is safely released into the open air at a controlled rate, preventing it from building up again to explosive levels again.
Hey, that's useful. At least people can settle around this area again, but like constantly having to maintain those. But then again, that would just mass kill animals. So maybe the better solution actually is this. This is the better solution, easily.
The first degassing pipe was installed in 2001. 2 more pipes were added in 2011. By 2019, researchers who had been monitoring the site determined that the degassing had reached a steady state, and even a single pipe would be able to maintain the desired CO2 venting rate. With that solved, what happened to the survivors? Well, many were displaced after the incident, having to leave the area. Ephraim Che ended up adopting 7 of his uncle's children who had been left orphaned by the disaster. Together with his own children, that meant he and his wife had 11 mouths to feed. Thankfully, foreign scientists monitoring the lake ended up hiring Che to measure lake levels, guard equipment, and complete other tasks for their research. So, Che was able to stay in his home on high ground near the cliffs above Lake Nyos. Halima Sul and her husband mourned their children and the rest of the family. The two had to live in a refugee camp in Womb for a while, along with other evacuees from the region. But eventually, life had to go on. They settled down in a narrow pass above the lake on high ground and built a new compound. By 2003, they had 5 new children and 40 cattle. In an interview published in the Smithsonian.
Damn, they locked in. Oh, they locked it, bro. I couldn't have any children after that. I couldn't. I would be so paranoid to have more children, and these guys just like, yep, I'm gonna pop up 5 more. I couldn't do that. Nah, I couldn't do that. That's crazy. Diffusing Africa's killer lakes in a remote region of Cameroon. An international team of scientists takes extraordinary steps to prevent the reoccurrence of a deadly natural disaster. So it is a natural disaster, the gas.
Smithsonian magazine, Halima said, "I'm no more thinking about the disaster. I have more children. I'm thinking about the children I have now. The only problem is a lack of cattle to feed them and to pay for them to go to school." Her husband, Abdul Amadou, added, "If I think about what I was, what the family was, I can go crazy. So I try not to. We are believers. Your children can survive you. You can survive your children. It is all in the hands of God." The couple appreciated the scientists' work in the area, emphasizing that they felt peaceful when they were in the area since they knew that something was done. However, when the foreigners inevitably had to go home, they admitted that they still lived in fear. Lake Manoon also went through degassing efforts, after scientists linked the Manoon and Nyos events to the same geologic process. What began as a mystery steeped in fear and superstition gradually transformed into a story of science, resilience, and prevention. Through years of patient investigation, engineers and researchers turned catastrophe into knowledge, building a simple yet ingenious system for pipes that now keeps both lakes safe. Their work stands as proof that understanding nature's power is the first step toward coexisting with it. We may not be able to stop the Earth from breathing, but we can take steps to ensure that it doesn't take our breath away again. If you found this video interesting and would like to help get it noticed by the algorithm, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Another way you can help us is by checking out another one of our videos, like this one, where we finally get to the bottom of how shrimp sold at Walmart became radioactive.
That's rather interesting. Radioactive shrimps. Thankfully, I don't eat shrimps at all. Okay, so to summarize, 1,788 people died, as well as all their farm animals, and wild animals around, they just died because of a sudden outburst of large amounts of CO2 under a lake, or like in a lake, because of the volcanic activity below it, and then also possibly a landslide, and that killed all of them. That's pretty much what happened. And also that this happened in another region with 34 people. That's pretty much it. Crazy, but something like that can happen. Well, I know where I'm not going. I'm never going anywhere near a lake that has volcanic activity. That much is clear. I want to live. I want to live and breathe and be happy and not die of not getting enough air. Oh, and the children survived mainly because they just didn't hear the landslide. So their like breathing rate and heart rate just stayed the same. Well, for adults, well, it was the case. And if you were higher up, you also were safe. Moral of the story, don't live near a volcano or on a volcano. Right? I think the question that we haven't learned our lesson from Pompeii. But then again, that wouldn't get that far to Africa up until then. So anyways, that was interesting. Like, comment, and subscribe.